War means there is one strategic category that is just critical to the whole thing. And that is Christians have universally, from Augustine till today, theoretically, have been universally forbidden to use the killing of non-combatants as a means to conduct war. Absolutely forbidden. You cannot kill people who are not trying to kill you immediately. You cannot kill civilians. You cannot kill children and women and men who are not participating in who are just not trying to kill you. And this was recognized and understood that this was grave intrinsic evil to kill a civilian. In the First World War, of the 9 million dead, approximately 5% were civilians, 5 to 10%. And it was thought to be an atrocity that many civilians would be killed in war. In the Second World War, of the 52 million dead, 48% were civilians. There is not a Catholic, a Protestant, or Orthodox bishop in the world who is saying, you can't do it during the Second World War. You can't be bombing cities. England started the process against Germany. Germany retaliated at Coventry, and on it went from there. But no one said a word, and you're killing civilians by the millions. The millions. Dead all over the place, and so a word was developed. You drop a bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, major cities. You say that there's a Mitsubishi factory that makes tanks in one, and you say there's an armament factory or two in the other. You drop the bomb supposedly on the factories. They never hit the factories were never hit. But you say that the 180,000 people who were killed are now collateral damage. Collateral damage. When the just war says you cannot kill civilians. Non-combatants are immune. Hundreds of thousands are killed, millions killed in the Second War. It's collateral damage. That's the new term. If it's collateral damage, it's just. Well, once again, it is a civilian that's being killed. The notion of collateral damage entered into the just war theory way back only on the basis of this. If someone were firing a bow and arrow or a pistol, and someone ran across the path and get hit or killed, it was understood. It was understood that there was no reasonable way that person could have known that that person was going to run across the path and be hit by a bullet. But when you kill 48 million civilians, when you kill 100,000 civilians and destroy a tank factory in Nagasaki, you can reasonably anticipate you're going to kill civilians big time. And when you kill 600,000 civilians in Iraq, you can reasonably anticipate it's murder. The point being, of course, in all of this, that war is to be the last resort. That's where this business that we got into a little bit earlier, has to be the last resort. Not the first resort, the last resort. And finally, because we've talked about these areas before, finally let me just add one thing here. Two words. Two words. Ad bellum, in bello. Two phrases. Ad bellum and in bello. Ad bellum means that these standards have to be reasonably met before the war begins. Reason has to tell you that before you begin the war, these standards are going to be met. In bello means these standards are met as the war progresses day to day. Now stay with me for a second on this. The church's teaching, Catholic, for sure, most Protestant churches, certainly the mainline one, every one of these standards has to be continually met, or the war is unjust killing. Every one of them has to be continually, not the whole group of them. That is, you can't say, well, I'm not killing civilians, but I know this is not the last resort. Unjust killing. Every one of them has to be continually met. Parenthetically, we could say, the proof is overwhelming what it means to go to war and not meet these standards in bello. Where is it? It's in the post-traumatic stress reality that follows. Killing an innocent human being, unjustified killing of a human being is by definition morally murder. Murder. And a human being, he can be told, well, it's legal. He can be told, but my commander said to do it. And if he murders, he knows it. And you don't walk away from it that easy. And the minute you get out of that closed society of the battle group and you come back to normal living and you recognize that you blew away a child or children or people who were doing nothing, all of a sudden it becomes very clear. It's the unjustified taking of human life, and it makes no difference whether you're sergeant or whether you're commander-in-chief or whether the Congress or anyone else said you could do it. It's the unjustified taking of a human life. Murder. There's the famous study that was done by General Marshall. He was a colonel then, but later became a general. By Colonel Marshall during the Second World War. He was the head of the United States Army History Department during the Second World War. And he did something that no one else had ever done in the history of the world. He gathered all kinds of social scientists, social psychologists, and historians and psychiatrists, and he did something that was never done before. In 400 different theaters in the Pacific and Europe, he went out and he gave tests to infantry combatants who were in close quarter infantry fighting. He tested them after the battle was over, but before they could return to their group, before they could get back in the group. He did this in 400 different campaigns in 1944 and 45. And he came up with something that was utterly astounding. Utterly astounding. And he published it in 1946 in a book called Men Under Fire. He published it. And what he came up with was this. In the vicinity of 85% of the men in hot combat either refused to fire their weapons or intentionally fired them to miss. even under the threat of death, even after all that military training, they refused to fire, or they intentionally fired over their heads and so forth. Up to 85%. No one paid any attention in the churches to this, but the Pentagon did. Because they knew you can't fight wars this way. And they knew what the problem was. Military training. The people were trained well. How to shoot the gun, how to aim the gun. They were given the propaganda to kill. But something inside them said, don't go there. Don't go there. Don't go to human bloodletting. And they didn't, even under the threat of death. These are not people that ran away. But don't go there. It's kind of like in the Old Testament. Remember, Cain is the first murderer. First act of homicide. Which is the first sin, by the way, outside paradise, homicide. It's also the sin that kills Jesus. Isn't that interesting? I mean, we say Jesus suffered and died. No, he did not suffer and die. He died in a very particular way. He was murdered. He didn't die in bed of cancer, and that's important to the historical record, but it's intentionally kept out. He was murdered. Homicide, unjustified homicide, murder. Well, anyway, the point being that what Marshall was focusing on, was the fact that all the good military training, it wasn't enough to get people. And he began to think about the fact that in the Genesis story, in the story of Cain and Abel, Cain kills Abel. Then God comes, and we know the story. He says, where's your brother? My brother's keeper. We know that part. But we don't look at the next part. God puts a mark on Cain. But it's not like a mafia don putting a mark on someone. The mark that God puts on Cain is so that no one will take revenge against them. It's a protection mark. So God doesn't respond to violence with violence. He responds with good. He tries to protect them. So now Cain has gotten rid of Abel. God has not condemned him. In fact, God has protected him. And the words in Cain's mouth are, my punishment is too much to bear. What punishment? My punishment is too much to bear. Human bloodletting. Something in here says, don't go there. Today we know, at least in the big cities and not in many small cities, I'm sure you're in Kansas City, if a policeman in the line of duty, utterly and completely legally, no question at all, kills someone, his revolver is gone, he goes into psychiatric treatment, and if he can't come back, he gets total disability. That's how sure we are that human bloodletting destroys something that's not supposed to be destroyed. Well, no one in the theology world paid any attention to it, but the Pentagon did. And they knew that they had to redo their military training to get people to like, even enjoy killing. And so beginning in 1947, they began to employ Skinnerian and Pavlovian techniques that would get people to like what they would actually see in battle. And so, in the Korean War, it worked. Marshall did exactly the same study, and it was no longer 85%, it was 50%. Actually, straight on, killed people in battle. And of course, in Vietnam, it was 95%. But what was done was, God has implanted something in the human being. That human bloodletting is not where you go. Don't cross that line. If you do, something is going to happen that you don't understand. but it's going to happen. And so we developed the technology to help people cross that line. They will not know the results till after they do it, but they'll be fooled into crossing the line. It's called military training, which is no longer just training to pull a trigger on a gun or to aim it. So, what we have here is, if all the standards of the Christian just war theory are not met, the default position, that is, the logically ordered next step for the Christian, is gospel nonviolence. If any one of those standards is not met, the killing is unjust, unjust killing is murder, and the only other option is to return to Jesus' teaching because you have not met the standards to remove yourself from it. And so we come to this. All the standards are required to be strictly interpreted. That's in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the new one. It says it right there. We're in Just War section. It says all the standards have to be strictly interpreted. No loose interpretation. Strictly. Of course they do. Because you're dealing with mass slaughter. You're dealing with killing. You're dealing with murder, unjustified killing. You've got to make sure it's justified before you do it. Strictly. We'll talk about the strictly in a minute. Where the destruction of human life is at stake, the highest degree of probability of its moral permissibility, that's a technical term in Catholicism, probabiliorism, is required before moral certainty that is necessary in order to morally kill is achieved. Just 1 second. Suppose I were to say to you, you were called to love as Christ loved as a Christian, which you are, which we are. Huh? So you come into an actual situation. Doesn't make any difference, Catholic or Protestant. Come into an actual situation. And the actual situation is that does loving as Christ loved mean to do this, or does it mean to do that, or does it mean to do that? You have doubts as to what loving as Christ loved means. Huh? How do you resolve it? Because that happens with every moral standard that you can think of. The moral standard is there, but seldom is it ever on all fours. And so you ask yourself, how do I resolve this? Well, in the Catholic Church, there is a moral theory that must be followed to resolve it. And the moral theory fits pretty much the way the structure of consciousness goes. And we'll talk about it in a minute. But the point is, the highest standard of probability in that theory, not certainty now, but probability, is something called probabiliorism, which means you have to have approximately 75% certainty that this is morally correct before you can do it. In a less serious matter, it could be 50%. And it goes all the way down to about 40%. Mere probability. But the point is, you have to have it. So at any rate, if any one of the norms of just war theory, as we said, is missing, the killing is unjustified. Unjustified killing is morally murder, grave, intrinsically evil under all circumstances. Remember that phraseology. Gravely, intrinsically evil under all circumstances. Meaning that it is an utter disruption of one's relationship with God. In Catholic terms, it's called mortal sin. The ultimate in spiritual destruction, if it's murder. Now here's what I was talking about, and I will say this fast so you will get it. And you won't have to, you can get this later, but there's something called moral theory. And moral theory is the theory that you have to use by the structure of consciousness in order to determine in doubtful situations how to act. And doubtful situations come up. You can make a law, but the law doesn't, in most cases, fit foursquare with every event that it's supposed to cover. So you've got to figure out. And so the first step in this is tutorism, which means rigorism, which means that you've got to be absolutely certain that the case is that this law is not being broken before you can act. That is heresy in the Catholic Church, in most heresies. It would make life intolerable because we cannot figure out all of the variabilities that are in a situation. Rigorism is forbidden in the Catholic Church. It's called absolute tutorism, and it is an impossible practice. Remember, you have to act in time. And in time means that you've got to act before you get tired, or before you wear out, or before you just die from starvation. You've got to act. And that means you've got to make a decision without all the facts before you. And you can't insist on everyone having all the facts all the time on everything. Rigorism or absolute tutorism is forbidden in the Catholic Church as heresy and in most other churches. Now, here's the probabiliorism. A person may decide in favor of freedom, which means he can act only if the reasons against the existence of the moral law are substantially sounder and more probable. To this it can be objective that a moral law only binds if its existence is certain and that there is a presumption in favor of freedom. A moral value willed by God, but the Church allows this opinion. And what we're talking about here is, this is high-level probability, 75% certainty. Now, this obviously doesn't go to the fact of, did I fast an hour before communion? No, this is about intrinsically evil matters like murder. You can't deal with the intrinsically evil, grave evil, on any other basis but this. High probability that you're not committing evil. Then there's equiprobabiliorism, which is 50-50. And finally, there is what's called pure probabilism. And probabilism doesn't even mean 50-50. It means even if you think that it's only 40-50, you're not sure. Huh? There's doubt. You don't know. You really don't know. Huh? It could be the other way. It really could be, but it could be that you can act. You can act. And finally, there is this, laxism, which is absolutely always and under all circumstances forbidden as evil. Laxism is when there is the merest trace of the right that you can do something. We're concerned about this whole business that you can make an argument for anything. You can make an argument for anything. But you can't make an argument and inside yourself say, boy, that's really a stretch. And then go and do the thing. That's laxism. 40%? Fine. 40% certain? Fine. But we're talking, we're just, anything can be argued. So you cannot just have any old semblance of an argument and say, oh, there it is, huh? There it is. Weapons of mass destruction. 100 million people out in the street saying there are no weapons of mass destruction. on February 16, 2003. 100 million. Millions in Rome, millions in Paris, millions in Tokyo. You say, well, so where are we? We're saying that what we're saying is, and we'll skip over one here, what we're saying here is that moral certainty, that's the Catholic term for what you have to have in order to act. And the more serious the action that you're going to undertake, the higher the level of moral certainty you have to have, with the ultimate being the destruction of human life. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. You have to have a high degree of moral certainty, the highest degree of moral certainty, probabiliorism, the 75% certainty, before you can act. And so, what we are confronted with is this. Abortion. The entire presentation of it by the churches that are against it is intentionally racked with confusion. They are intentionally making it something it is not. What it is it's grave intrinsic evil. That's what it is. It's the taking of a human life unjustly. That's what it is. Always and in every case, it's evil. But consider this from John Paul II's Evangelium Vitae. The text of sacred Scripture never addressed the question of deliberate abortion. Never addressed the question of deliberate abortion in Scripture. And so do not directly, specifically condemn it. But they show such great respect for the human being in the mother's womb that they require, as a logical consequence, that God's commandment, "You shall not kill," be extended to the unborn child as well. Abortion is murder. Abortion is not abortion as a second category or a supplemental category to moral theology. Abortion is murder, the unjustified taking of human life. Period. Now, furthermore, the Pope continues, the exact quote, "What is at stake, the life of a human person, is so important from the standpoint of moral obligation. The mere probability that a human person is involved would suffice to justify an absolute clear prohibition of any intervention aimed at killing a human embryo." See what's being said there? What's being said there is not that the entity in utero is a human being, as can be proved. It's saying the mere probability that the entity is a human being justifies not killing the human being. And finally, from the same encyclical, same paragraphs, one right after the other. "Precisely for this reason, over and above all scientific debate and those philosophical affirmations to which the magisterium has not expressly committed itself, the Church has always taught and continues to teach that the result of human procreation from the first moment of existence must be guaranteed the unconditional respect which is morally due to the human being in his or her totality and unity as body and spirit. The human being is to be respected and treated as a person from the moment of conception." Do you understand what I know it's long, it's the first time you're hearing it, and when you read it again, but let me see if I can just clear. The church has